Hello, project people. You're listening to the soothing sounds of the Project Chatter podcast. I'm your host, Val Matthews. And as always, I'm joined by my big man, Mr. Dale Fung.
Hello, Val. Soothing Sounds, second pod in a row. I wonder who you're
I
talking
like it.
about.
I think it's going to
Yeah,
stick. It's going to stick.
perhaps it will, perhaps
Um,
it won't. Certainly not us, though. Maybe our guests again.
Maybe indeed. Just a reminder too to all our listeners to hit that subscribe button on whichever platform you listen to your good podcasts on and on our new YouTube channel. In this pod, we're joined by Amal Khawaja and IJ Samuel. Welcome, Amal and IJ. Thanks for joining us. How are you both?
Good, thank you. Yeah.
Very well,
Very good.
thank you. How are you?
I'm good. I'm in sunny Adelaide at the moment, so all well on this side of the world.
Well,
Stop
lucky
But on this
bragging.
pod,
Teasing us there, Val.
I wasn't going to mention it, but we were talking about it before we press record, so I will be enjoying myself. But on this pod, before we get into the sun, I'll be chatting to Amal and IJ, also so will Dell, about what equality, diversity, and inclusion is in project leadership, what it really means. But before that, let's get into the bios, Dale.
Thanks, Val. These are amazing bios. And so just listen to this. I'll start with Amal. Amal is a senior consultant at Turner Townsend with 7 years experience in planning, cost control, change management, and performance reporting across a broad portfolio of projects and industries. She has a BE in civil engineering from the American University of Beirut, and an MSc in construction management from the University of Reading. Amal worked in the Middle East before moving to the UK to pursue her master's degree. She is currently working in the program advisory part of the business and has been with Turner & Townsend for over 3 years. Amal wears other hats as well. She is an ED&I champion and lead, challenging the status quo and bringing change, women and ED&I to a male-dominated industry. She founded the Client Diversity and Inclusion Network in March 2018, and since then played a crucial role in championing and progressing D&I in the business. She's passionate about addressing the gender balance in the construction industry and making inclusion an everyday reality in the workplace. Wow. On to IJ. IJ Samuel is an associate director at Turner Townsend with over 15 years experience working on multi-billion-pound projects, helping clients like High Speed 2, Heathrow Airport, Kuwait Oil Company, and more across oil and gas, energy, and infrastructure industries. With a background in control systems engineering, IJ has excelled in leading multidisciplinary project controls teams within various project management organizations. She draws on her extensive project management experience, PMO expertise, governance assurance, and stakeholder management charm to develop strategies that enable the setup, execution, and delivery of multi-billion-pound projects and programs. IJ equally has a burning passion to diversify thought leadership and normalize equality, diversity, and inclusion in the industry. She's a people-orientated, inspirational leader, and her natural relationship building energy flows right into developing inclusive, high-performing teams through mentoring and coaching. Wow, what amazing bios. It's so great to have you both on the show. IJ, Amal, thank you so much for joining us. First off, how are you feeling, IJ?
Yeah, I'm feeling good. I was just listening to that bio and I thought, wow, okay, no pressures tonight. But yes.
Well, that's certainly an amazing bio, and we're probably in for an amazing conversation. Amal, how are you feeling?
I'm good. Super excited to be here. I'm looking forward to this chat, and it's my first time on the pod, so definitely looking forward to that.
Well, it's our pleasure to have you, as Val said. So it's always, you talk about ED&I, so, equality, diversity, and inclusion, and people always sort of bunch it together, and they think it's the same thing. But actually, there's three things in there, and perhaps we can dissect each one and try and understand that. Because when people hear D&I, sometimes they just think it's a male versus female thing, right? They don't, or they just think maybe it's a race thing, or this or that. but actually there's so much to it. There's so many moving parts. So we'll get into it. We'll go down rabbit holes, and we'll see what nuggets we can find down those rabbit holes. But I just thought in terms of a baseline and perhaps to give us a bit of the backstory, particularly from a project management perspective, perhaps we could just share with the listeners how each of you sort of got into the space and what drives you. So why D&I? What is the passion? What is the end game? What is the vision for you individually? Before we try and dissect each one of these topics, and maybe I'll go to Amal first.
Yeah, sure. My pleasure. So D&I is something very passionate to my heart, and I'll just take maybe a few steps back in a few years as to sort of how I got into the industry. So I have, as you said, a BA in civil engineering, and the reason I studied civil engineering was actually a bit of a challenge with my dad, who, despite being super liberal and democratic, and he's probably going to hear this pod because he's rooting for it. So despite all of that, he was also of the mindset that, civil engineer, you're going to be on site, you're a young lady. That doesn't sound right. I'm Lebanese. I'm an Arab Muslim woman. That's something that, I'm very proud of, and it's where I come from. I was raised in Lebanon. So the stereotype around, women being on site was something very prevalent. And to challenge that, I decided to study civil engineering and thought, why not? But then when I graduated, I realized that there's a much bigger challenge, okay, what next? What now? I don't see a lot of role models. And especially in Lebanon, I didn't really feel there's a lot of people that in high positions, or women that I feel I want to be like that person, or even the industry obviously is not as advanced. A lot of the research and studies and conversations happen in this part of the world. They're not in Lebanon. So long story short, I was sort of picked to get into planning team because it looked like it was a good fit for a girl. And I'm going to be very blunt here. This was, one of the things that obviously drives me a lot, because if this is why I was sort of just, and it was said very clearly that, this is sort of, it looks like a good fit and we're missing people in the planning team. So why not start your career there? They did probably add, planning is great and it will teach you a lot of things, which definitely spoke to the, nerd inside of me. So I got into it, and a few years later, I realized that, okay, what next? I didn't feel I'm progressing a lot in the industry. I stayed sort of within the same, challenges and trying to find things to do. All my bosses were males. I didn't have any female mentors. And, the list goes on. So I decided to sort of just break that barrier and see what the West, which is what in Lebanon, we refer to, holds for me. And I came to the UK to do my master's, take a step back from my career and just sort of reflect and see, okay, is it the same everywhere? Is construction, stereotyped, or is it really the same? And then when I finished, I got into project controls, which is sort of, a bit of my background. And I realized that things are different, but not very different. And especially being an Arab, a Muslim, it's something I repeat, and it's not to, it's not to just, neither to brag, obviously, nor to make people feel, they can't really deal with it or handle it, or what do we really do? But it's actually to open these conversations around we're all different. And I came to this industry different. And although it was embracing, but it could definitely be more embracing, and people can have more conversations. So it's what really got me into that path, and to follow my passion of talking more about D&I and seeing what I could do, how we can promote it to younger girls. And obviously we'll get into more details on this.
Absolutely. No, that's amazing. And two things that struck me is, one, you're a disruptor, and we love disruptors at the Project Chatter podcast, and two, you mentioned you're a nerd, and we love nerds too. So thank you for joining us. IJ, was it a similar story for yourself, or was it something quite different that sort of spurred you on?
There are parts of Amal's story that I could relate to. So I studied electrical electronics engineering back in Nigeria. I think there was about 6 of us in a class of about probably about 90 to 100. And so barely less than 10% of us girls in the class. So for some people who come from Nigeria in terms of ethnicity and their background. At the time, a lot is changing now, but you were either a doctor or an engineer, a lawyer or an accountant, and then everything else, right? So I had to, there was a natural fit for me. I loved building things, fixing things. I don't know, I picked it up around the house and I went into engineering. So going through that path for me, I didn't see any difference between being a boy or a girl. I was very comfortable growing up. I've only got one brother, but as soon as I got into engineering, it was just like a natural fit for me. There was nothing in terms of sometimes what we see in the industry. I never ever noticed I was the only one, unless people said it. Oh yeah, you're doing engineering. That's what it clicks like. But I go like, so what? You know, anyone can. It's just one of the professions that disciplines that you go into if through growing up in Nigeria in that sense. So a bit like Amal as well, coming over to the UK to do my master's degree, picking up within control systems, coming into the industry now. I think that's where the rubber hits the road for me. Again, very comfortable starting out in oil and gas. I didn't know any different. Like I said, I was just one of the boys. Didn't bother me. Didn't even know there was anything from a D&I perspective. It wasn't something that was, you know, top of the radar for me. But empowering others have always been something that came natural to me. At the time, I didn't even know what it was, but I just knew that I love helping people get ahead. I love helping people do stuff just to help them get ahead. And over time, what I found, like people who were in the industry, they start telling their stories. And then it struck me, initially, it didn't strike me because I thought, just get on with it. That's what we do amongst the boys. It just never struck me any time at all that what they were sharing were their lived experiences of how they were treated. But I think for me, like I said, when the rubber hit the road for me was when I went on maternity leave with my first son and coming back from maternity. And then I got told I couldn't be put on any serious project because I've just come back from maternity. I'm thinking, I've been a top performer. Come on, look at my performance reviews and all of that.
Wow. Wow.
You know, what is this? And slowly that began to spark a number of things within me to say, okay, now I can relate more to these stories now. I think before then, it was like, yeah, there were stories I did empathize, but it probably didn't hit home until it came very closer to me. And then pulling together my natural, my natural instinct about helping people or empowering people, that got me fired up to say, hang on a minute, something doesn't stack up here. And a whole bunch of other things that we'll probably jump into when we get into the convo a bit more.
Oh, absolutely,
But
we will.
yeah.
We will get stuck in. But that's fascinating. As a fellow African, obviously I'm from South Africa. It's fascinating to learn that you didn't experience that inequality there. In Africa, you had to come over. Was it over here in the UK where you first experienced it?
Yes, because I'd say back home there would be other things that you'd experience, but it wouldn't be,
Yeah.
for me, it wasn't so much about gender inequality for me.
Yeah.
It was about, like, I was the only woman on site and everyone would be celebrating me as the only woman on site, you know,
Yes.
because
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
strange for them to see it. There
Yeah.
were microaggressions in terms of, yeah, we know
Right.
you're on site, but calm down, you can't do this, you can do that. I'm like, no, I am so doing it. Crazy
for
like
you.
that. So they either have to put up with me or, you know, so
No,
that's
it's great.
just how I got ahead.
It's great and it's fascinating. And I think Africa is probably more of about a haves and have-nots divide, maybe. And that's certainly something as a South African that I've seen. And it's just a shame that the have and the have-nots are typically
Absolutely.
different skin colors. And it's a shame, but it's great to have the perspective from the various cultural backgrounds on this pod. Maybe this is just a case for diversity as well, but let's see how we crack on. Val, I've done enough talking. I'm handing over to you, mate.
Yeah, thanks, Dale. No, it was great to get your insights and at least understand your backgrounds as well. And I think on projects, it's an unusual soup of people pushing together against usually unfair timelines and unorganized deliverables. And we'd like to think that the academic side of delivering a project is quite easy. The theory of a project seems relatively basic if you think about it. And then you include people from different backgrounds and you include people with different skill sets. And I guess the point we're saying today is we're trying to understand how do we empower people, as you said, IJ. That's a great concept, but get people across all areas of the project in the project management sphere. Obviously, there's this goes outside of projects as well. I'm not excluding there. But if we could just break down maybe a few of these acronyms, E&D, and talk about equality. I think equality is a really topical conversation, particularly women in roles, and we need to talk about that. And we need to talk about as well the encouragement, or at least, further emphasis and investment on education and getting people, and particularly minorities or women, in those roles early. And I first wouldn't mind talking about equality, if that's okay, guys. And I'll start with you, IJ, if that's all right. So what does equality mean to you in projects, and how would you like to see that in the projects you work in?
Sure. That's a really good place to go there first, because Amal and I, we were chatting about this on, I think we were together on the Project Controls Expo last year, and we were chatting to people there regarding how do you bring to life what equality means, and then how do you strip it out from where diversity comes into the play, and then where inclusion pulls it together. And the way I like to describe it is where equality is when you give someone an invitation to just join a podcast, for instance. So, okay, it could be anyone. You throw it out, whoever wants to apply, anyone. If you say whoever, the first 3 people or the first 2 people, you pick them. There's no rhyme or reason. You just made it in. Okay. For me, that's throwing it out there, playing cards, equality, right? And then you step it up a little, where you talk about diversity. So it's not just about throwing out that invite now. You're then saying, I want you to be part of this. So the podcast that we put out, it takes us maybe a month or 2 or whatever it is to pull it together. So rather than just me throwing out an invite to you, would you come and be part of this planning of that podcast, which you would then feature in a month's time or 2? For me, you're now talking about you're making it a bit diverse right there, because you're empowering me a little bit more, and it doesn't matter my background, you're just empowering me. Now, where I see inclusion then come into play in the same conversation would be then, now you're asking me would you be able to host this? So I might be helping you out, pulling it together. I may never have the confidence to host a podcast, but you throw it out there to me, you give me the invitation and extend it a bit further. Would you be able to host this? Just I'll step aside and you host this. Now you're empowering me, you're including me. So for me, there are different lenses on how you look at equality, diversity, and inclusion. If we bring it back into the project environment now, so one thing I say to people that we need to be mindful of, when we talk about equality on its own, it's not only about, right, we need to have 50% women, 50% men, 50% Black people, 50% white people, 50%, whatever. It's beyond that. We're talking about how do we harness diversity of thoughts and make that an equal playing field when we're having conversations and decision making. We're not saying it's going to be all perfect, but do people feel that on that table, they can actually have the voice to contribute? They have an equal voice. A very simple example I share to people all the time. If you're in a room, and this is very common in project environments, so many shared experiences have, corroborated this story here. You walk into a room, there is someone that you always look at when you're presenting or when you're talking. Now, you can put that across the spectrums of equality or diversity and inclusion there, or equality and inclusion. When you're just facing that one person, the other person presenting, you're like, oh, I can't wait for you to hurry up. Or I'm not sure I even understand your accent or what you're saying. You're right there, not giving that person an equal playing field in that room. Regardless of, I've heard this, not even with people from different cultural backgrounds. I've heard it from the north to the south. So it's not only when we talk about equality, we're not always talking about much, obviously it's part of it in terms of cultural differences or different backgrounds and all of that, but it's the diversity of thoughts in the room. Are they at equal playing field? That's critical for me when I look at equality.
Brilliant, IJ. Thanks for your thoughts there. I agree with your sentiments as well. It's not about quotas. It's actually about inclusivity and making sure there's a balanced playing field for everybody. I think that makes sense to us on the pod for sure. And I like your analogy using the podcast as an example. That was great. Amal, over to you for your comments.
Yeah, I mean, IJ put it nicely. We've obviously, you know, had similar chats before, and she has those great analogies, you know, to bring it home to people. I think if we also take it a bit more maybe project environment, as you know, rightly said, although equality, diversity, and inclusion are three different words, they mean different things, but there's a reason they group together because they complement each other in a certain way. And I genuinely feel it's hard to really break them up from each other. And, you know, you might see it common happening these days, especially in project and big clients, and, you know, dropping the E, for example, from equality and using words like diversity and inclusion and just sort of grouping them together, which probably sounds nice, it's catchy, but, you know, you're still dropping a big element. So I think just to, you know, wrap up a bit on this one, equality is just treating everyone equally, as simply as it is, and then breaking it down into what that really means, as IJ said, giving two people the equal opportunities to do something is treating them equal, not just having 50% women and 50% men. You know, when IJ came back from maternity and she wasn't given that project just because she had just come back from maternity, that is not an equal treatment. It's obviously unfair, but it's also not an equal treatment because her male counterpart doesn't even go on maternity. They go on paternity, that's for sure, but it's not seen as the same way. And, you know, diversity is something we're just born with. This is who we are. We can't change who we are. We can't change how, you know, we can change how we think in certain things if they're not right, but you can't really change the structure of who you are. You definitely can't change your skin color. You can't change your accent, despite how much you try. There's still stuff that are gonna, you know, stay somewhere. So this is the diversity of whether it's, you know, physical or the diversity of thought, cognitive diversity, which is one of the main things that, you know, links back to diversity. And obviously inclusion is bringing these two together, and how does everyone feel part of that one team? And I know I tapped on the three of them, Val, and you were trying to sort of break them up, but I really feel I can't break them up when I'm talking about them.
No, that's fine. That's fine. No, that's great comments as well. I think we all agree with your sentiments there, and it goes really well into this next question. You know, and it's the conundrum of how we recruit for projects as well. So, you know, let's say there's a demand for a particular resource, and I'm going to pick planner because they seem to be the ones we always have not enough of. And I say good planners, good old planner, particularly in Australia. So, you know, obviously I'm speaking from a different part of the world, but I've worked in the UK as well. And one of the challenges, recruiters go out there and they say, right, what are we looking for? And they'll say something like, we're looking for a planner with 15 years rail experience. And you go, fantastic. And they go to the market and they bring back all these male CVs. And, you know, it's not that this is my personal experience, but it's not that I don't think people leaders and managers want to hire, you know, competent females in roles. Sometimes their cause is there's just not enough supply. So you've got to follow the stream back to the source. And this is what I was talking about before with education. I think there's a missing link at the start of that journey for them. Now, it's great to hear your kind of origin stories about how you got into project controls and projects in general. I think it's fantastic. And how you didn't see much of a difference to start off with, but now, you know, obviously in your careers, obviously you're highly educated women, you're starting to notice some cracks in the system. How can we fix that? Because is it our recruiting process that's broken? Should we be asking for 15 years experience? Or is there another competence metric that we should be using to help inclusivity and equality and diversity? Amal, I might start with you for this one, if that's okay.
Yeah, for sure. So there's sort of two things to this, obviously. First of all, our recruitment approach is broken, that's for sure. It's the lens we put to recruitment. We're not adding the diversity and inclusion lens to it, which helps us see things differently. When we go and ask for 15 years of experience, the job might need 15 years of experience, but what is it you're really looking for? You know, what do you want that person to deliver? Are you outcome focused, or are you just driven by the fact that the client asked you, I want someone with 15 years of experience? They might have 15 years of experience with much less exposure, or they might have been on amazing projects, but they might have been playing a less important role maybe than someone else who has 7 years of experience, but has been exposed to so many other things. So I think this element of the recruitment definitely stems down to what are we looking for? Who are we looking for? Why are we looking for these, sort of descriptions? When we write a JD, a job description, what are we really after? Are we really writing down the key skills and qualifications? And I'll come back to that a bit, because sometimes also that can be a bit excluding, some people. It's the skills you're after. What can this person deliver? If you want them to be a planner, you ideally want them to operate a planning software. If in a certain environment, they have to, maybe have knowledge of B6, fine. You're not excluding people because that's the environment, that exists. But other than that, what other skills do you want them to have? What soft skills do you want them to have? Which I think a lot of the times we exclude in our environment, in the recruitment system, especially in a project environment. And then if I may, it's obviously a really, really big topic, but if I may add as well, that if we go back many, many steps to why you might not find women with 15 years of experience, it's because of the how the industry is seen. I mean, my personal experience is how I got into the industry was, a challenge with my dad. And it actually started with when I attended my brother's graduation, and I barely saw any women graduating in, civil engineering. And I thought, why not? Let me do something different when I get the chance to. But this was just me and my drive. But a lot of girls out there, you need to sometimes, go and change the image they may have, the stereotype they may have been fed about whether construction or other STEM subjects, because obviously this links back to other STEM subjects.
Yeah, thanks, Amal. No, there's some good points there. IJ, did you want to comment as well?
Yeah, so resonating a lot with what Amal shared there, and I do have some lived experiences that I can almost relate to. So if I jump in at the back end of what you shared there about going back into the talent pipeline, so going into schools, encouraging women, girls to even think about subjects like that. I loved physics in school, so that helped me when it came to choosing what subjects I wanted to do. There was a natural tilting towards engineering because of the subjects that I loved and enjoyed. But I was smiling right there in terms of, so I've done some recruitment fairs for the business. And when you stand there and you have this secondary school, college age, I think around GCSE level, and they attend the careers fair, you do have the girls, when they come to the stand, they say, what do? You share about what we do. We're not always, when you hear about consulting or construction, it's not all about being on site. There's also jobs that we do in the office. And then you get one who's asking, you go to site sometimes? Sorry, that's not for me, but that's been fed from somewhere. You laugh, but that's fed from somewhere. Yeah. And that's where we need to even go to. So you do find some programs now go all the way to the primary, rather than just only focus on secondary. Obviously, there are different spectrums where you make the bigger impact, which is sometimes at secondary, you make a lot more impact when they start thinking about stuff, but also you start influencing them even much, much younger. I hear people who say, I buy my girls Lego set, or they buy Hard Hat or whatever. There's no right or wrong. It's just what people feel more led or inclined to do for their daughters. My mom, bless her soul, she passed 2 years ago now, or a year and a half now, but there was nothing like a boy or a girl in the house. It was more around everyone had equal capabilities. There wasn't like you go watch the car and then you do this one, or you stay there. There was none of that. Everyone had a go at everything. So I've come through that mindset, but I'm conscious that not everyone have come through that mindset. So there's something that we need to be doing at different stages. And then if you fast forward, you touched on recruitment. When you then come to recruiting, if your pipeline is weak, you're only going to get the same set of people that have been coming through. Exactly, so we need to work on the pipeline. Amal, you touched on JD. I've interviewed a lady who had, sorry, but different people anyway through my time, but I've had a lady who had 15 years experience or 20 years experience, but only just doing one role through her career. Nothing else to show for the great CV. During the interview, I've interviewed a guy who had 20 years experience, talked a good talk, came into the team, couldn't deliver a thing at all. So it's what do you put out in the job description? As recruiters, are we challenging enough when you go out to recruit? When the client says, this is what I want, do you put any challenge on that to say, maybe I can help you out to attract in this way? So again, this is something out there for recruiters. Are you challenging your client enough, or are you just taking their requirements just so you earn a fee? Question mark.
Yeah,
but I'll leave it
there's
there.
some great points there, IJ and Amal. I think we both agree there's a two-prong approach to this. I think it needs to be rectified at the source. We need to remind, I think there is a bit of cultural bias, particularly in the West, that, girls wear pink and boys wear blue, and boys play with Tonka trucks and girls play with dolls, and there is a bit of a pressure there to conform to that, or at least assimilate to that kind of style thinking. Girls are prissy and girls are delicate, and men are tough, but we obviously see that that's not the case, and that women could do certain jobs, and men could do certain jobs, and some exceed and some don't. I mean, I don't think gender or cultural background necessarily gives you a competitive advantage, unless you're playing sports. But in the project field, it certainly should be an even playing field. And I like the idea of the pipeline needs to be filled, and we should challenge our recruiting system, because the system, I think, for recruiting, if it's just based on years, is not really result orientated. It's, we've had this challenge in Australia, just info for you guys, where they look great on paper. That you get these people that look great on paper, but under the surface of that, and we're calling them, under the surface of that, there's no depth to that knowledge, or experience or competence. And I think that's what Amal was alluding to as well. Is we also need to look at what we're trying to achieve. And Dale and I have said it on a few pods. You hire for attitude and you train for skill. And I still think that's the case with equality and diversity. I think, if they fit the team, if they're hungry and ambitious, and they've got ideas, that's what we want to harbor, and that's what we want to foster and enable. Because the skills itself, and I'm going to offend probably everybody listening, but it's not that hard. Everything we make it complicated because we're humans, but I'm just not sold that it's that difficult. And I think we can all do a little bit harder to make this a reality. So I'll pass on to Dale now for some questions.
No, you bring up some good points there, Val, and just listening to both Amal and IJ talk, there were so many points that popped up, and some of it, as you referred to our previous pods in season 1, we had some amazing role models. You spoke about role models. We had Holly Patterson and Caroline Patterson, not related, but Holly had the engineering background, and she spoke about also sort of being the minority in a male-dominated industry and how that affected it. And it was very similar to what you were saying, IJ. And speaking to Caroline's amazing woman, and she is one of the most amazing leaders as well, that we've all worked, myself and Val and Martin have worked with. And one of the things we spoke about is perhaps the generations gone by, because they've been indoctrinated and brought up in a certain way and have a certain mindset. Perhaps we should have some sort of empathy towards them, because they don't know what they don't know. And I feel like the tide is changing with the generations that are coming up. And yes, there's still an element to it, but I love the fact that it's the status quo is changing. And I think we need to realize that as well, that it's not stuck, but it is changing. And the more we talk about it, the more we air it, the more informed people become, and the more we give them perspective. So that's a fantastic thing to point out as well. I was listening, fascinating about the 15 years experience on a CV, and Paul Googe says, is it 15 years experience, or is it 1 year repeated 15 times? And that's often what you find. It's often you find, oh, you got 15 years experience. Okay, so what is the breadth of your understanding of this role? Well, actually, I only know this little bit over here. And then you're like, well, okay, well, maybe you don't have 15 years worth of experience, So it is a really fascinating one. But a couple of things that popped up into my head as you were chatting was, One, how does unconscious bias come into this? Because it's often a bit of a buzzword that companies throw around, that we gotta go on unconscious bias training. But what does it really mean, and does it really change our views? Because for me, it's something that you've got to live, breathe, believe in, and then change your own state of mind. It's not a course you can go on to and all of a sudden I don't have any bias. That's my first point. And then the other one was, if we go too far on the other side in terms of, we have to be, too strict in terms of how we are equal and diverse and blah, 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 do we actually risk alienating anyone? So I guess there's a few different questions in there, but I'll let you respond first.
Resonates so much with me, Dale. Unconscious bias can definitely be used as a buzzword. A lot of companies can use it as an opportunity to say we've done something, we've ticked a box, we've given our staff unconscious bias training, when in fact unconscious bias training is simply making you a bit more aware of the fact that you have something called unconscious bias. It does not help you solve them. It does not rid you of them. We can't rid anyone of their unconscious thoughts. I mean, sometimes we are not aware. It is called the unconscious for a reason. And this is a topic very dear to my heart, because as much as it has impact on everything we do, and as much as it has impact on sort of, if you want to call it, the ED&I agenda, but at the same time, it is not the solution to everything. However, that being said, it's very important for us to understand what unconscious bias means, to understand that we've got something called an unconscious bias, and to probably do some training and tests to understand what your unconscious bias could be, because we all have unconscious biases to different things. It could be as simple as you might be in the back of your mind, you might have a bit of a prejudice against overweight people, or someone who looks different, or someone with an accent. These are normal things. We're human beings. We're wired that way. And it's not something you can change. And funnily, I once was doing a presentation on that, and a very interesting question came, and you can probably imagine the sort of background. The person, that asked me that question was, if I have got unconscious bias, and if it's unconscious, then should I really worry about it? And what should I do about it? And why is it even important? And it's important because it shapes a lot of our conscious decisions. And it's what allows us to, pick people for a job. If you're going to an interview and you've got a certain unconscious bias, if you don't have someone else with you to sort of just help you see things from a different perspective, you're most likely going to fall for that unconscious bias. You might even pick people for the stretch jobs based on your unconscious bias because they look like you. And it's a bit of a, the group thinking, group sort of group affiliation with people that look like you and feel like you. And this is why sometimes you might even find people that not necessarily look together but have similar background and sort of mentalities. They come together, and there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean you should change your friends or change the people you like, but it's just understanding how this shapes a lot of our decisions. I think I'm going to pause on that and give IJ some leeway to touch base, because I know it's obviously very dear to her heart as well.
Sure, go for it, IJ.
Sure. Okay, so I think we are aligned in terms of unconscious bias doesn't solve anything in isolation, but is a starter for the conversation. If people are not aware of their blind spots, how can they consciously change anything, even if you wanted to put the effort in? That's why I love a lot of the self-awareness tools out there. Some businesses have embraced it. Some team leaders do embrace it as well. So that's something that I do in my team as well, to get people to be self-aware. First, understand yourself, your strengths, your abilities, how to even describe your strengths, your weaknesses. How do you perceive others? When you work in a team, how do others perceive you? What sort of leader are you? What sort of team member are you? There's so many tools out there, Myers-Briggs, Dick's personality. There's also insights. There's a number of them out there that you can use within a project environment to kind of start testing your own self-awareness as well as your own team self-awareness. Unconscious bias remains unconscious unless someone brings it up. It's called blind spots, like when you learn how to drive, mirror signal maneuver, blind spots and all of that stuff, So again, in project world, we need to bring that to life. So yes, we do need unconscious bias training. If done in isolation, don't bother. If you're not going to change anything culturally within the business, I'd say do not bother with that training, because it just goes in here. It flies out, like you go to a conference, you're on a high. 2 weeks later, you do nothing with what you get from that conference. It's a bit like that training. That's how I see it. Unless
Yeah.
you have a cultural trend you're driving, don't bother.
No, that's fascinating as well, and I think not just for unconscious bias training, but any training. If you don't have hearts and minds in it, it's a bit of a boxing exercise. And you talk about culture, and the fascinating thing is, culture is something that isn't made up by one individual; it's a collective. But the people that influence and mold that culture are leaders, and that's what we're talking about on this pod. And how do we create that culture? And specifically in project leadership, how do we create that culture on projects where we actually harness the advantages of diversity, inclusion, etc.? And one of the things you spoke about was blind spots, and you both work for a consultancy and you work with different organizations. I wonder, without naming any names, if you could share your insight as to, when you go into companies, what are some of the main blind spots that companies actually don't realize that they have? And what are some of the things that perhaps folks listening to this podcast will go, okay, I see that happening, but I didn't realize that was actually part of the problem. And perhaps a bit of that awareness is to actually call it out and to say, this is what we should be aware, that this should not be happening. Are there any themes that you've come across? Amal, maybe I'll come to you first.
Yeah, definitely. First of all, if you look a bit at the sort of leadership, a bit of maybe stats around, those listening who like a bit of numbers, a recent Harvard Business Review has shown that 78% of employees who, responded to the study, they actually believe that there's a lack of diversity in their leadership. And what that actually leads to, based on, that study, is that women are 20% less likely to be heard and to be, their opinion taken into account than the straight white men. And, 24% and people of color are 24% less likely to be heard. And then those who identify as LGBT are 21% less likely. So this sort of really helps paint a picture. If 78% of the leadership, based on that study, it does not reflect diversity and it does not reflect the people, then how can the leadership of a business or even a project really understand what the people want? So I think one of the main blind spots is that the leadership does not ask the people what they want and what they really think works and doesn't work. Each company is different, each project is different, and I probably refer to companies because some of the projects have become so massive that they actually last so long, and they've got massive teams. And I worked at Heathrow, and it just felt like not like a project. It's just you're part of the entity, you're part of a big team all delivering the work. So what do the people really want, I think, is the number one blind spot that leaders miss. And it's where they can start their diversity and inclusion journey, to ask, I think you've also mentioned on one of your pods, Dale, that you sort of do a bit of a speed dating with the team, if you're, starting with a new team, and asking them, how do they like things, and how do they like, to do certain things. And as part of it is asking people, what are your values and what matters to you? And a big part of that will link back to D&I, because we're humans and this is what shapes us. Whether you're a mom and it matters to you to pick up your kids, or not to stereotype whether you're a dad and you want to spend more time with your kids, or, for the non-parents out there, whether you just want to do your workout at some time and that means to you, how do you feel included and you can be your full self in that team? I think this is sort of one of the main things that is really missed in organizations and projects.
No, that's good insight, and hopefully, those that are listening to you recognize that, because, like I say, a blind spot is exactly that. You can't see it, right? So IJ, just coming to you. Do you want to add to that?
Yes. So I suppose one of the biggest one for me, if I step into any business, would be looking at the communication that exists in that business, and it's two ways. So what flows down from leadership into the teams? What does that messaging look like? Then if you do a random sampling of the team members or various team leaders, how comfortable are they to challenge the status quo whether it's been holding the leadership to account. So again, how well are they able to communicate top down, bottom up? And you can see some teams that are so nervous to challenge anything or provide any feedback or have just an open and honest conversation amongst their teams. They might not even know it. You looking from the outside would see that there's something fundamentally not right. And one-to-one, everyone is bitching about everyone else.
Yeah.
Talking about the leadership, talking about team members. There's always one in every business. I dare to say that. But if you take away the anomalies, when you go into different teams and they're all echoing bits and pockets of things not right, and no one willing to step up, challenge the status quo, or step into that gap and do something different. For me, really, there is a big blind spot that the leadership are not seeing that is flawed in that business. And you can put it down to so many things, but I put it down to comms, top down and bottom up.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I tend to agree with communication is key, not just on projects, but communication. In organizations too. How do you know how you're supposed to behave and what the culture framework is that you need in terms of how you need to behave and follow. And it's fascinating as well. And often you find you talk about those outliers, those individuals that sort of talk about other people in negative ways, and they can often be like a cancer that spreads, and we've got to eradicate that at source, right? And it does take sort of a bit of bravery and courage for people to put their head above the parapet and say, actually, no, that's wrong, you shouldn't be doing that. But I do believe that is getting better. I've seen it far more in this day and age than I did, say, 5-10 years ago. So it's encouraging to see that practice, and I do agree with you. Val, over to you, mate.
Yeah, thanks, guys. So great conversations, as we knew we would have with you two lovely women. And, we talk about communication. We had a guy on, Vin Yang, who's a communication expert on a podcast earlier, and he had a hashtag for people. He would train people to present public speaking and that kind of field as a showman. And he had this view of break the mold. So, I thought it was a great concept around how you can step into a new mindset, a new understanding, a new attitude. And I think with culture, it's the same thing. We've got to win hearts and minds and educate people. And that comes through awareness training. But like you said, IJ, if it's just, or Dale, if it's just a 2-day course and, you tick the box, which is kind of somewhat how they do this in big organizations, like everyone needs to go on equality, diversity, inclusion, inclusivity training. Everyone does it, everyone high fives, and then it's left to the dust, and nothing's really changed in the culture. So I think there is something to be said about how we manage the culture and how we develop that. But if I might just swap to the other side of this conversation, because again, we want to have all sides kind of heard and your lovely input, as well as maybe some debate if we can. There's a growing trend now, and I think some companies and organizations, particularly in government, and I'm probably speaking for Australia, but maybe in UK as well, is okay. They've recognised there's a gap, particularly in the gender diversity as well, in certain markets, and maybe that's planners and controls and project management where we reside, and they've requested now from consultants a quota as part of their bid submission for tender packages of work, and it's scored, it's weighted, and so you get to that point where have we gone too far, or has the government gone too far to regulate how we manage our internal equality and diversity and inclusivity? And what do we do about that? Because this is something you can't discuss with the government. The government's made it a mandate. I'm not sure if the UK is the same, but it's something that if you don't have a certain amount of females, they could actually score you down. Now, the concern I have is not the fact that you have an equal number of females or more females. That's not the problem. The problem comes down to the bid should be recognized, or the work should be awarded to the company with the competence and understanding to complete the work. And if they have the right framework, then they've got the right kind of diversity in that company. But how do you stop kind of it becoming a bit of and I'll tell you the strategy. So let's say a company wants to win the work so bad that they'll hire any woman to win that work, whether they're competent enough to do the job or not. And this is something that's really happening. So I'm not making this up. And I'm really keen to get your ideas. I'm not trying to be judgmental or anything. how do we stop that from happening? Because that's also dangerous to this movement of inclusivity and diversity. If we have poor performers that are representing a minority because of something that the government's put in place, it's kind of overreaching, I think. But IJ, I'd love to start with you if that's okay.
Right. Okay. So when it comes to quota targets and all of that, there's always two sides to the story. Some love it, some hate it. The way I look at it, and from what you described there, I don't know the government and the policies too well in terms of Australia and what happens out there. But from what you just described there, I I can relate to why that's been put in place. But just listening to what you shared there, there's probably a different piece of the puzzle that is missing. I'm okay for the target they put in place. What I'm not hearing is that you will be held accountable after you win the work. There will be a checkpoint or checks and balances through delivery to ensure that the people that you hire, you hold their feet to the fire, you put the training in, and then empower them to ensure that they actually, so maybe tracking their retention rate or something through the life cycle of that project. If they haven't put that in place, and then they've just done a blanket target, 50-50 or whatever the ratio is, it will be a bit like the unconscious bias training we talked about, where it sounded like a good idea in principle, but if you don't add the cultural bit to it, the cultural shift to it as a business, it becomes flawed. So I'm all up for, you do need to know how big the gap is, which is where you then put a target as a measure of intervention to work towards something. If you don't tally it at the back end of that target, to have how you track the development of those people, how they deliver through the life cycle of the project, then something is missing. I don't know the system too well, but I can, if that's not tied to the end, something is missing.
No, they're great points. And just a shout out to anyone in the government if you're listening. There's some great tips there from IJ to make sure that that's a transparent and a long. It's got to be a long based strategy. It can't be short term, quick wins for the organizations that are putting these quotas in place. I think for them as well, it's a bit of a tick box exercise. I think what's driving it maybe is there's some KPIs to make sure that they're driving diversity back in through their contractors. Perhaps that's where it started. I think all these things come from good intentions. I think people come out and they say, we want to include people. Let's put something in place to encourage that. You know, it's like if you have a project and you want to encourage BIM, certain methodologies. You know, well, I'm going to put that in the mandate, aren't I? When I issue that for contractors to bid for. So I think this is the same process. I think it's probably just not mature enough, maybe, and that's what I'm getting at. Amal,
sorry, if I just jump in again before Amal, you come in. The other thing I was going to say as well is that the reason I say that I do love the entry point of what that drives. If you know the ripple effect of what we discussed earlier, the entry point of that is, for once, there might be someone, could be a woman, could be any other metrics they put in place, but for once, there will be someone who gets an opportunity to be invited to the table where they would never have been invited to sit. Without that target, you probably would never start scratching the surface of having that person sat on a table.
Yeah, no, good feedback.
Over to you, Amal.
Amal?
Yeah, I would have to sort of agree with IJ on the fact that you need to start somewhere, and the fact that everyone's trying to do good. Yes, probably. We're not, saying people mean harm. I think, however, the problem is they don't look at the picture. They don't look at the whole picture. They're just looking at sort of different parts of the story, and maybe a tick box exercise, maybe not even, maybe they think, oh, if we've got 50-50, then that's good. But let's maybe take it back a step and say 50-50, okay, you've achieved equality, but then what about the other elements? Maybe you've reached equality, because then you need to monitor how that 50-50 is being maintained, whether the women are being given, for example, the same opportunities for growth. Is there, that glass ceiling where we know sort of a lot of women struggle with? I think if we take the example, because you've mentioned projects and Also, I'm not very aware of sort of the government, Australia. I know we're in the UK here, but also if we look at the Olympics project in London, 2012, I think that was a great example of the client trying to implement ED&I in the project, and also, you know, some lessons learned, because things don't go right the first time, and because we're still, I wouldn't say we're new on the ED&I journey, but in construction, everyone is still fairly, I think, on the, I would say, dare I say, lower end of the curve, because you see other industries that are much more advanced, and we're still talking about things like YD&I and all of that, when other industries have, you know, crossed that way back. But if we take the Olympics project, for example, the client wanted to embed ED&I, but they had to do something more than just ask them to have a certain quota or target. They had to ensure that, you know, the tier one contractor is really implementing this within the supply chain. They're also, you know, providing the supply chain with things that help them implement policies. So for example, if the supply chain includes suppliers that are not very advanced, you need access to the policies that that tier one contractor might be more advanced in, and to monitor how that happens, and then to have things like, you know, open events and that allow the supplier to really understand what's meant, you know, what does this really mean? Why do you want 50% women, or, you know, other things, because we're just giving example for women, but I'm conscious there's many other facets to it. And how do you monitor the progress? Are you asking for reports? Are you putting it in your contracts? Are you then maybe taking stock at the end of the project? You know, that sort of things all complement each other, and just putting one element to the bid and granting someone the bid based on that is definitely not the right approach for it.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying, Amal. I just want to touch on your point there around the 50-50. I mean, I remember back in the day, I worked on a big program in Adelaide, in Australia. It was a $50 billion program, and somehow something happened, and I ended up with a full female team. And some of you will say, "Well, lucky you," and it was fantastic. They were a great team. And you know, we used to embellish it. We used to say, you know, girl power, and used to really piss off a lot of people along the way because we thought it was fun. And I really enjoyed managing the people because they really enjoyed working with each other. And I think it was for the company being that size, 3,500 people. I think they really enjoyed that. But I go back to your point around 50-50. Is there any evidence to suggest that an equal gender set, at least, is better, positive, more successful for the project? Is that outcome based, or is that just a suggestion from ED&I?
I think that obviously I wouldn't say the 50-50 necessarily gives more outcome, because if we're just talking about women, then are we really saying the team has to have, you know, 50% everything? Because, you know, it can become really complicated. I don't think necessarily the outcome is increased by 50-50. I think the 50-50 goes back to more equal opportunities, because the women might not be given the same opportunity. But I wouldn't probably, I'm not, you know, as IJ said, there's people who love quotas, people who love targets, there's, you know, people who hate both. I'm more of a average kind of person, where I don't think you necessarily need a certain percentage in your team for it to be a successful team, but it's a matter of being aware of your overall demographics and overall, you know, feel of the team structure. And, you know, are all of your women in the team just, I don't know, at assistant level or controls engineer level, or do you have lots of women managers and directors maybe? You know, I don't think I've actually worked on a project yet in my humble 7 years where I've had a female director directly on the project I'm in, like a direct team. So there's definitely a lack there, but I wouldn't take it to, as you said, Val, the need for a 50-50 to drive better outcome. I mean, I've actually been in lots of teams where there's been more women, and that probably wouldn't reflect that, oh, this means the project controls environment is very balanced. This is probably just the team I was in and, you know, the team you worked in, Val. But maybe over to you, IJ, on your thoughts on this one.
So again, one of the key things I point out to people when they're talking about ED&I in project environment, it's not so much, for me, it's not about 50-50 or the percentage split of male versus female. If you are in, I would use the example, if you're in Cumbria in the UK, right? Maybe you know where that is or not, but in northeast of England, that way, diversity to you would mean something different versus if you're in London, okay? diversity for someone up there could easily be, we hired another bloke who maybe studied in London, maybe grew up in London, maybe just come from London. He's still a bloke, but he's part of our team. It's not a male-female thing. It's just someone else who's got a different perspective coming into our team to share something and bring that balanced decision making. For those people, that could be diversity, as simple as that.
Yeah.
Whereas for some people who may be in London or Sydney or some of the big cities, you know, when you talk about diversity, you then put different lens on it from gender or ethnicity, LGBT, and all the other facets, disability, ability, and all of that. So it depends really on where you are, how mature your business is as well. Amal, you touched on being aware of the demographics within your business. You know, where you were in a team where you had more female than male, you know, everyone would be like, whoa, that's really a good achievement there. But I've led a team where I had more female than men. And each time that we had to go out to recruit, I had to say, can you find a man who can do X, Y, Z? I had the opposite. But that's me being aware and being conscious that I wanted to change the diversity of thoughts in the team. For me, it wasn't about the quota of male, female. We needed to have a balance in our diversity in that team. So the way I look at it, 50-50, that's not really where I'm focused on. It's more about, do we have enough diverse thoughts on the table for balanced decision-making at any level across the business? Thanks,
IJ and Amal. I think I resonate with your thoughts as well. It's around equality of opportunity. I mean, we talked about recruitment and fixing that system because it's broke. It's about having awareness. I think that's a really good point as well. Being mindful. It's also about having local talent. I think, you know, if you're going to build in Adelaide, I'm a little town in Australia. It's about 1.5 million people in this. They call it a city, but I call it a town. Now, if I was going to build a project here, I'd want local people from Adelaide. And whatever that diversity mix is and the perception of those people is, it's diverse for them. So we want them on the project because their thoughts and their minds are what going to, well, if it's an infrastructure project, they're going to be using the system, you know, they're going to be using the project. So, you know, you've got to have local input, which I think is fantastic as well. One more idea I wanted to share with you before I pass off to Dale to finish up the pod. And it's just an idea, is one of the things I've started thinking about, and I've done this with a few clients, is to remove the gender preference in CV submissions. Now, we have a lot of fantastic females on our team and we have a lot of fantastic males on our team and they all fit within this PMO space. So one of the things we thought was, well, what would happen if we submitted blind CVs? As in, you can't tell where they're from, you can't tell how old they are, you can't tell if they're female or male, or non-binary for that matter, if you talk about inclusivity, or if they're gay. You just base it on their merits. And obviously we've done the due diligence of making sure they're actually competent people, right? I just wanted to put that in there. Do you think that's an effective way to start submitting CVs? And would you use that kind of, or is there another idea that's better than that to make sure there's an even equality of opportunity at the onset of a job, let's call it? I'll start with you, IJ.
Okay, so I would look at that as just a start. What you just described there, we've tested it and I've also read a number of other businesses have tested it. That method works at a certain level. So let's say you're getting an apprentices, graduates, mid-level experience. Once you step up the gear and go into the management and leadership space and you want to recruit, it doesn't matter what you put on the table, strip out every bit of humanity from that CV, you're still gonna get loads of straight white males up on that table because the pipeline, we've not focused on grooming the pipeline. We've not focused on developing the pipeline or diversifying the pipeline, I should say. Okay. The people that you get when you put that CV and when you eventually put the names back on there, they just happen to be similar people that go around the industry, especially in big projects. Mega projects, major projects. It doesn't matter what you strip out that CV, you come back to the same people. And those are the CVs you get.
If we assume that the pipeline was full, let's say we did have some level of equality at the leadership level or management level you're mentioning, would that I mean, because that's another problem. There's a supply problem. I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
But would that help the blind CVs if we had the supply?
If you had the supply there, blind CVs definitely will help. But we can't go there yet until we start diversifying the pipeline. So they two go hand in hand. It works perfectly. There's so many studies, there's so many companies that will probably give you evidence that at grad level, we smashed it. 50%, 50-50, smash. At whatever level, we smashed it. Go to senior leadership. We're not there.
Yeah, gotcha. Amal, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, if I may add, so say you stripped off all of these personal information, which obviously we say, you know, could play a big factor in the biases. Let's go back a step to the conversation where we were talking about recruitment and what we're really after. Because if we're still after the 15 years of experience, then we're still going to be looking at the CVs, which probably have 15 years of experience. And we might pick the woman. So, you know, I'm going here into a bit of details where you might get it right. You might pick not just the woman, the person, you know, from an ethnic minority background that you want to, you know, give the opportunity, or, you know, anything that you just want to bring to the table. But are you looking at it in an open lens, in an inclusive lens, in a diverse lens, in the lens that helps you really understand what is it that you're after in this job? So I think the blind CVs, as IJ said, would obviously, if the supply is, you know, ideal, which it isn't, but let's say in an ideal world, it would work. But if we are in an ideal world, then you'd probably have what you're looking after set out in your head in a bit more ideal way. But since we're not there, then it would probably work if you just have a bit more thinking of what is it you're really after, the skills, and you know, what kind of person do you really want in your team?
Yeah, no, thanks, Amal and IJ. I think it gives us insight into kind of what the priority of the issues are. I think if you look at ED&I, it's actually not to do with equality and diversity as such. I mean, they're all connected, as you said at the start of the pod. It's all integrated, but it's actually around the supply of those women, if we're talking about gender as one point, in those roles, and how we recruit for them. I think that's probably the real thing we need to tackle. And it probably goes back to all the leaders and managers listening to this podcast, is like, how are you recruiting? And I guess, you know, we can talk for another podcast, maybe on best ways to promote EDI when you're recruiting or something like that. But thanks for your time. It's been really interesting, and appreciate your input. Dale, over to you, mate.
Yeah, no, it is fascinating, and the time has flown by, and this, you know, there's a lot we could go into as well. But just to comment while I was listening there, a lot reminded me, specifically when we were talking around quotas, about South Africa and their sports teams, and how they, you know, South Africa is famous for the wrong reasons, apartheid, right? And it was a terrible part of South Africa's history, which they're trying to come out of and right the wrongs. And one of the ways they tried to do it was instill quota systems in sports teams, where you had to have X number of players of color in the national sports team. And it's almost identical to what we're saying here on this pod today, is that the pipeline wasn't there. So all of a sudden, and fortunately for me, I've never been part of a quota system, so I don't know how this feels, but just listening to some of the players that were in that system, they wondered, were they picked because of their ability and skill, or because of their skin color? And that was when it first came in. But over the years, they realized they got it wrong. And what they then started doing was addressing that pipeline. And I think that's really key. And so today, if you look at our sports teams in South Africa, they're far more diverse than if you look back in the 90s. And, well, in the 80s, we were isolated from playing sports. But if you look back in the 90s, predominantly, if you looked at rugby and cricket, it was white, right? But if you look today, if you look at the, Martin will close his ears for this as an Englishman, but if you look at the 2019 South African World Cup winners, you know, it's a diverse team that comes from all sorts of backgrounds. And if there's one player that you need to go and Google Mapimpi. Google Mapimpi. He's the first South African to score a try in a World Cup final, and we've been in 3 and won all 3 of them. But just listen to his background, right? That is a story. That is a powerful story. Go and Google Mapimpi. Anyway, I'll give you that one for free. But just summing up, I'm so glad that you agreed to be on this podcast. We've had such great conversations, such diverse conversation, and perhaps this is an example of inclusivity, diversity, etc. And it's not just about, we touched a lot about, gender and men and women, but it's not just about that. It's about race, culture, religion, all sorts of different things. And I think and I hope that leaders, and perhaps not, even if it's not today's leaders, but future leaders perhaps listening to this podcast, will take that on their journey and help be part of this change. That's sort of my sentiment towards this. But this brings us to an exciting part of the podcast. A brand new feature on the podcast that we decided to bring in today, just for you two lovely guests, and maybe a bit of a drum roll in the background. This is called Defend the Indefensible. And so it's a brand new part of the podcast. For this, we welcome our in-house general counsel, Mr. Martin Curriston. So Martin's been patiently listening there in the background, but Martin, over to you, mate, for Defend the Indefensible.
Thanks, Dale. Really enjoyed the podcast. It's some of the points you raised were fascinating. Really enjoy it. So yeah, as Dale said, we thought for season 3 of the podcast, we thought we'd trial a new feature at the end. It's inspired by some of the brilliantly ridiculous statements and comments we've all heard over the years from our management team. So it's called Defend the Indefensible. So for this, our guests will defend a ridiculous statement for 30 seconds. And at the end of the series, we'll poll the best answers on our Twitter, LinkedIn pages for it. So if you're willing, should we try it out?
Can we say pass? Go for it.
I dread to think of some of the things that you've come across over the years, but okay, let's try. So I've got two statements. I'll start with IJ first. So you've got 30 seconds to defend this statement. Diversity on major projects is pointless. Sometimes the best candidates are just white males over 50.
So, quite frankly, it is pointless, because if the candidates are usually over 50, and that's what you need for any business, and quite frankly, we've delivered so many major projects. We built tunnels, we built railways, we've built so many iconic projects with little diversity. So what's all the fuss? What's all the noise about diversity? We've been doing this with people that are seriously experienced. So diversifying the pipeline, so what? It's not going to change much.
On time. Well done. Very passionate.
No pressure on
I'm
me.
not sure how that went.
I almost believed it myself. Amal, your statement. So 30 seconds to defend this. Do we really need to change the status quo? Our business is making profit. Our shareholders are happy. We're doing just fine.
You probably are doing just fine, and you probably don't need to change it now. However, if you fast forward 10 years from now, you might actually be out of a job, because everyone else will be ahead of you. Everyone else will have more balanced teams, more diverse teams, reflecting their culture, reflecting the places they live in, and you will just be behind. And you just have to get ahead of the curve.
Thank
a bit
you.
less than 30 seconds, I guess.
Only just. Very good. Thank you.
No, thanks for taking part. It's a bit of fun at the end, because we often hear these ridiculous statements, and we thought we'd put them out there and see if we can defend them, because it's people do like to know if we do have views on them. So thank you again for being on the pod. I just want to come to you for any final thoughts that you perhaps want to leave the listeners with as we head towards the end of this pod. IJ, let's start with you.
Sure. It's really been a great pleasure. Thank you for having us. But keywords to leave with the listeners here. When you think about equality, diversity, and inclusion, I would say don't just think gender or disability, or just little pockets of I'm ticking this box and that's it. Think about how you're attracting talent. how are you progressing those talents within the business? It's one thing to look good on market facing and you attract them, right? If they are not progressing within the business, they would also jump in and then they'll jump out. So look at the full life cycle of the business and the full spectrum. How do you attract? How do you retain? How do you progress them and help to bridge that gap in leadership so we have a more diverse team? So it's been a pleasure being on here. Thank you for having me.
It's been our pleasure. Thank you so much, IJ. Amal, any final thoughts?
Same here. I mean, it's really been a pleasure being on this pod and talking about a topic I'm super passionate about. I think a few last thoughts I would like to leave people with to, especially for those thinking, okay, great points, but now what can we do? If I'm just, someone who, I just work in a project and, go every day, how can I change things? Can I do anything? I would just tell people to think of the little things they can do different, whether it's starting a conversation or having a chat, or maybe, using things similar to health and safety moments where you could use a diversity and inclusion moment and just, bring up something you've read online or, maybe share a personal experience if you're up for it. If you're someone managing a team, just maybe look a bit, how are you managing this team? You might not have a direct impact on, the numbers and how the company is doing, but on your project, is your team happy? Do they have the opportunities to really progress? And what impact do you have? And also maybe hold the company accountable, because every project is part of a bigger company, whether you work for consultant, client, contractor, etc. You are part of an entity and you need to hold them accountable. So I think that's my final thoughts to leave everyone with. And thank you, everyone, Dale, Val, Martin for the challenge, and IJ for being my co-guest.
I love it. And you're right. I think it's, it's about marginal gains. There's no silver bullet or light switch that we can flick to change things, but it is about those marginal gains. Val, your final thoughts?
Oh, obviously, I want to thank our fantastic guests for being such good sports as well. We threw that last bit in and we didn't even tell you. So you did really, really well. But also, it's a really good conversation. I think, part of Dale and I's vision for this pod is to pay it forward and to have those discussions that no one else is having, and have an open, free and fair platform for people to bring these types of topics to the forefront. I'd even go so far, Dale, and I haven't even talked to you about this, but we want to help. So if there's something we can do on our website, perhaps we can develop some type of platform or page where people can go and they can get support, and you guys want to be part of that. We talked about mentoring before, and I think that's one of the key points, isn't it? That female mentors and other kind of inclusivity mentors would be useful to help them become aware without having to go through that 2-day training. But it's been a great conversation. I think we could probably get another pod. We'd love to have you back. Do keep in touch. I'd like to keep this conversation alive. So thanks for your time.
Thank you for the offer. I'll probably take you up on that.
Yeah,
and IJ as well, I'm sure.
Yeah,
there you go.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's
watch
do it.
This space is all I say.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Fantastic.
Let's do it. Thank you so much. Just before we go, one more surprise. If you're up for it, we have a pop quiz. Just one more, I promise, the last one. We have a pop quiz called Tenor, and it's 10 questions and answers. If you're up for that, we'd be happy to take you through this pop quiz.
I'm fine with it, IJ.
Project controls, project management, we take risks, we mitigate risks, so go for it.
There we go. Fantastic. Thanks for being such great sports. For this, we'll hand back to Martin to take us through it.
Okay, so we'll go through 10 quick questions. In terms of order, let's start with Amal and then move on to IJ. So 10 questions. First one, what's your morning routine?
My new morning routine is that I wake up and try to do some morning stretches, because I've noticed the work from home is not working very well for my neck. So that, and then I have my cup of coffee, which is essential for waking up. I do a bit of light touch news reading, and then I just start my day.
IJ?
It's not as fancy as Amal. I'm not a morning person at all. I could be up till 6 a.m., but I'm just, Anyway, morning routine, wake up, say a prayer, binge on my phone, and then step out, have a shower, have a cup of tea, and then start my day.
Very good. The second question, how do you usually plan out your day?
To-do lists. I am a lists person. And every day I just sort of, the day before I try to plan the following day, you always have endless to-do lists. And then, you reprioritize things depending on what sort of comes as more important for the day. So yeah, that's driven by projects as well.
Very, very PMO driven. IJ?
So I live in the moment. I just wake up, I think about one thing. If I did that one thing in the day, for me, it's success. My to-do list could be 1001 on that list, but just think about one thing. If I do today, I'm good. That's how my to-do list, that's how far it goes. And sometimes, project priorities come flying in stuff, but just one thing a day. That's it for me.
Good effort. Okay, question 3. How do you deal with stress?
I'm trying to deal with stress. It's definitely a challenge, especially these days we're living in. They're very stressful. And, some people who might have not experienced a lot of stress before are feeling more stressed now, especially with, working behind a laptop all day. But I think my escape mechanisms are probably things like running, reading a good book, and some quiet time. I think these are my saving grace to really, equip me for a better day.
IJ?
Very easy. Put on a big bold earring, put on a bright red lipsticks, call a girlfriend, and just laugh it off. Stress gone.
Brilliant. Great answer. Okay, so on to number 4 now. What's either your favorite book or your favorite movie?
I don't really do favorites with anything. I'm quite bad with favorites and picking stuff. But one book I'm really, really enjoying reading is Thrive for Ariana Huffington. And I think it's probably what's caused some of my little changes that I've spoken about before, because it's about how you can really, try to ensure you thrive in this really tough life, not just survive.
And to you, IJ?
Favorite book would be a bit like Amal. I don't have a favorite in that sense. I'm more audio than hard copy books and all of that. But Becoming by Michelle Obama, I'd say, is one that left a few things with me, along with so many others. But yeah.
Great book.
That's it.
Yeah, really enjoyed that book. Great, good podcast too, actually. It's good. Number 5, who is your hero and why?
That would be my old man, who I mentioned at the start, my dad. It's probably a bit, it might be a bit cliche, but to be honest, I can't think of anyone else who would be my hero. I saw him, how he raised us and the effort he put in, who he was and where, what he became and all that he put into it. And I would be lucky if I, managed to be half the person he is at some point in my life.
That's really nice. That's great. And to you, IJ? Who's your hero?
I do have a number of people I refer to as my hero, but if I flip it the other way around from what Amal described, it'd be my mom. She raised us not to see any different. I've learned that you need to see different now, but be aware of different and then do something different with it. But she raised us not to see any difference in anyone or anything you're doing. Just go for it if you want to go for it. But don't sit back, stuck, and say you didn't go for it because of XYZ. That wasn't acceptable in my house growing up. So thinking about that now, that shaped so much of who I've become through life in anything I'm doing. So yeah, that'd be my mom.
Great attitude there. Great inspiration there. Okay, so number 6. What is your favorite sound?
Silence. If that is a sound, I just love when I'm somewhere and it's just completely silent.
We can all relate to that. IJ?
Mine would be a bit of buzz, noise, sound. Favorite sound, like when you have a gushing wind, that sort of, it's heavy, it's noisy, it's there, you can't ignore it. That's me. I'm crazy like that. Yeah, that's me. I don't do that silence thing.
You've got opposites here. I mean, I'm wearing grey. She's wearing all colours. You can tell we're opposites.
Very diverse.
You can really see the difference there.
Difference, diversity of thought.
There you go.
I'm trying to bring out. Almost there. Number 7. What is the biggest mistake you've made on a project?
Oh, I mean, I'm sure I've done loads of them. Maybe the one sort of most stuck in my head would be not speaking up when I should have spoken up, especially being, more of a certain point a more junior professional in the environment and wanting to say something and not sure if you should say it. So I think that would be maybe a message for the younger generation out there to speak up your thoughts, get confident and just do it.
Definitely. Yeah, couldn't agree more with that. IJ, how about yourself?
Yeah, this one comes back to me every now and again. When I first stepped into management, and I did have someone that I told once that if you haven't got a degree, you may struggle to get to a certain point within the business, cross a certain threshold within the business. And a couple of years down the line, that was just the biggest fallacy anyone could tell a fellow human being. Like, seriously, degree or no degree, seriously, you only put that limit on yourself. And it's one of the biggest things that, I did share with this person eventually over the years, but at that time, like, what got into me to tell a fellow human being that there'll be a ceiling on you just because you haven't got a degree? There are loads of people that have gone far in life without a degree. There's so many examples. Why would anyone else tell a fellow human being that? So if anyone is listening to this, please, 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 if you've ever said that to anyone, go back, find that person, tell them they can only go as far as they want to, not as far as any limitation that you or anyone else put on them. So that's one thing I look back on.
That's a great answer. Yeah, completely agree with that. Don't be bound by any specific limits or anything. Don't let people tell you can't do something. So yeah. That is good. Number 8, what would you tell your 10-year-old self?
Enjoy being a kid. Adult life is tough.
I think that's been the most popular answer so far.
I think adult life has been tough on everyone.
Definitely.
I would just say, don't hide in the cupboard if you're called to be a light. Don't be afraid to stand out. Don't go behind someone else or behind the shelf just because you are worried about how you would come across, how you'll be perceived. Whatever it is that is going on in your head is 100% not real. Ignore it and just do yourself and just be yourself. You just know it within. If it's there, it's there. Don't hide it.
I can see everyone nodding on the Zoom there in violent agreement with that. So yeah, again, very, very good answer. Almost there. So what profession, other than your own, would you have liked to have attempted?
I would have probably wanted to be a photographer. It is a hobby, but I never really sort of took it as a profession. But I think it would be something that I would like to do, to capture the moment and be able to, have it there for people to really enjoy and cherish.
Nice. Yeah. Amateur photographer. IJ, how about yourself?
I would be an entertainer. I'm an ESFP by my Maya Briggs, okay?
You can see that.
I think one day we would have to do a podcast on different personalities within construction. I'm an ESFP. We don't fit in construction, right? So some people say, but you know what? Anything you put your heart into, you can do it. And that's my philosophy. So yeah, I'd be an entertainer if I was not an engineer, I think.
Great. See you go far in that one. Yeah, I think you get a fair bit of material out of that podcast as well. So it'll be entertaining. Right, last question. So if you had to spend £1 million in a day, what would you spend it on?
Oh, so I have it only for one day. I mean, if I can seal a deal on a house in one day, I'd do that. because the housing market in London is beyond crazy, but not a very crazy way of spending that money for one day. I'm sure IJ has crazier ideas.
I've had something that I've always wanted to do if I had the capacity to do it. I love to see like young people, like when I say young people, 6 to 12-year-olds who can, sorry, not 6 to 12-year-olds, say maybe 9 to 16-year-olds who can actually become entrepreneurs. I'd love to groom them, or not groom them is the word, invest in them, like open an academy. Schools don't teach you how to be entrepreneurial. They just put you in a box and you keep going, and then you go into the wild, wild west and it's like, whoa, what's going on? I'd love to have a school for young kids who want to become entrepreneurs.
Great.
I think £1 million will go a long way to do that.
It'll take more than a day, IJ, to build.
Just make the investment, nail it day one, and then we go figure.
It's a pretty good start to investment. Yeah, couldn't agree more on that point. So yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks both for participating in that. Some really good answers there. So really enjoyed that. Back to Dale.
Thank you, Martin.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Absolutely. And it's just to reiterate, thank you so much again for your open, honest, transparent views and sharing the knowledge that you both have. It's a very sensitive topic, as we know, but we desensitize it by having these open conversations. So thank you for that. So folks, that's all we have time for on this episode, but it doesn't have to stop here. Support our charities and access blogs at projectchatterpodcast.com. Don't forget to hit subscribe on our YouTube channel and your favorite podcast player so you don't miss the next one. A big thanks to our guests, IJ and Amal, and thank you all for listening. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From Val and me, it's bye for now.